St. Matthew's Cathedral stood silent in the morning light, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like fingers grasping for redemption. Inside, Sarah Mitchell adjusted her cousin's wedding veil with trembling hands, her heart racing with equal measures of guilt and determination. The elaborate deception had taken months to orchestrate, every detail meticulously planned, from the forged invitation responses to the strategic seating arrangements that would keep key family members at a distance. Now standing before the ornate mirror in the bride's chamber, she barely recognized herself in the borrowed white dress. The real bride, her cousin Emily, was probably still sleeping soundly, thanks to the carefully timed sleeping pills Sarah had slipped into her chamomile tea the night before. But what Sarah didn't know was that sometimes the heart speaks louder than any carefully crafted lie. What name would James whisper when he leaned in for that fateful kiss? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Sarah sat cross-legged on her bed, Emily's wedding planning journal open before her. The leather-bound book, a gift from Aunt Margaret, contained every detail of what should have been the happiest day of Emily's life. Sarah's fingers traced the elegant calligraphy on the cover, remembering how Emily had squealed with delight when she'd received it at her engagement party. "You'll be my maid of honor, of course," Emily had said that day, her eyes shining with the pure joy that seemed to follow her everywhere. Sarah had smiled and hugged her cousin, ignoring the familiar ache in her chest, the same ache she'd carried since that summer evening 2 years ago, when James had first walked into their lives. The journal's pages rustled as Sarah turned them slowly, studying Emily's neat handwriting. Guest lists, seating arrangements, flower choices, menu selections, every detail meticulously documented. But it was the small hearts Emily had drawn around James's name that made Sarah's stomach clench. She remembered exactly when she'd first noticed him doing the same thing, doodling little hearts in his medical school notebooks during their shared study sessions. James had been her study partner first, before Emily had swept into the hospital cafeteria that day, bringing cookies for her favorite cousin and inadvertently catching James's eye. Sarah still remembered how his expression had changed when he saw Emily, like a man seeing sunlight. For the first time after a long winter, "It should have been me," Sarah whispered to the empty room, her fingers clenching around the journal's pages. She'd spent more time with him, understood him better. She knew his favorite coffee order, triple-shot Americano with a splash of almond milk, how he rubbed his left temple when stressed about an exam, the way his voice got soft and serious when discussing difficult cases. But Emily, beautiful, vivacious Emily, had waltzed in and captured his heart in an instant, just like she'd done with everything else their entire lives. The prestigious internship Sarah had coveted. Emily got it. The vintage car their grandfather had promised to both of them, Emily's now, even their grandmother's antique sapphire ring. Sarah had always assumed it would be hers, until Grandma Rose had presented it to Emily on her 21st birthday. Sarah flipped to the back of the journal, where Emily had pasted photos from their engagement party. James and Emily, wrapped in each other's arms, looking at each other with such adoration, it made Sarah's chest hurt. She remembered taking that photo herself, forcing her hands to stay steady as she captured the moment that had shattered her hopes. But now, studying the journal's detailed plans, a different kind of steadiness came over Sarah. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, beginning to type. The wedding was still 3 months away, 3 months to learn every detail, to understand every plan, to find every weakness in the carefully crafted schedule. She thought about the sleeping pills in her medicine cabinet prescribed months ago for her insomnia, but never used. About the wedding veil she'd helped Emily pick out, so long and thick that it would hide any bride's face until the crucial moment. About how similar their voices were. A family trait that had led to countless confused phone conversations over the years. The pieces were there, waiting to be assembled. Sarah looked again at the photo of James and Emily, but this time she allowed herself to imagine something different. In her mind, she erased Emily from the picture, replacing her with herself. It wasn't so impossible, was it? After all, she'd spent years becoming exactly what James needed, the perfect partner, the perfect match. She just needed to show him that. And maybe, just maybe, when the moment came, his heart would recognize what his mind had overlooked. Sarah closed the journal. Carefully, her decision made. She would copy every detail into her phone, create her own parallel planning document, but with one crucial difference. In her version, she would be the bride. It wasn't stealing, she told herself. It was correcting a mistake, setting things right. As she worked late into the night, transferring Emily's careful plans into her own meticulous notes, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. Finally, after years of watching from the sidelines, of being the reliable, responsible cousin who never quite measured up to Emily's effortless charm, she would take what should have been hers all along. The last thing she did before going to bed was to create a new countdown on her phone. 90 days until she would become Mrs. James Harrison. The fact that everyone else thought it would be Emily walking down that aisle was just a temporary confusion, one that Sarah would remedy at exactly the right moment. She slipped the journal back into her bag, ready to return it to Emily tomorrow. Her cousin wouldn't suspect anything. Sarah had always been the organized one, the one who kept track of details. That's why Emily had trusted her with so much of the planning in the first place. That trust would make everything so much easier. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah smiled, thinking of James's face. Soon he would look at her the way he looked at Emily. Soon everything would be as it should have been all along. The rehearsal dinner buzzed with anticipation at the Silver Oak Country Club. Crystal glasses catching the light from ornate chandeliers overhead. Emily sat at the head table, radiant in a cream-colored dress, while Sarah stood behind her chair, champagne flute in hand, preparing to deliver her maid of honor speech. The delicate china teacup that would later seal Emily's fate sat innocently in Sarah's overnight bag, wrapped carefully in a silk scarf. "I've known Emily my entire life," Sarah began, her voice steady despite the weight of what was to come. "We're more than cousins. We're sisters in every way that matters." She paused, letting her eyes meet James's. He smiled encouragingly, and for a moment Sarah could pretend he was smiling just for her. "Tomorrow, she marries the most wonderful man I've ever known." The words tasted like ashes in her mouth, but Sarah maintained her composure. Years of standing in Emily's shadow had taught her how to smile through pain. She'd spent weeks crafting this speech, knowing it would be her last act as the dutiful cousin everyone expected her to be. "To Emily and James," she concluded, raising her glass, "may your love story be everything you've dreamed of." The irony of her words made her hand tremble slightly, but no one noticed. They were all too busy watching Emily beam at James, their fingers intertwined on the tablecloth. Later, as the evening wound down, Sarah followed Emily to her suite at the adjoining hotel. The bride-to-be was giddy with excitement and champagne, twirling around the room in her cream-colored dress. "I can't believe it's finally happening," Emily sighed, collapsing onto the plush sofa. "I'm so glad you're here with me, Sarah. I couldn't do this without you." Sarah busied herself with unpacking Emily's overnight bag, carefully hanging the wedding dress in the closet. The garment bag rustled softly, like whispered secrets. "You know I'd do anything for you," she replied. "And at least that wasn't a lie." "I'm so nervous I'll never sleep," Emily confessed, hugging a decorative pillow to her chest. "My stomach's in knots." This was the moment Sarah had been waiting for. "I thought you might feel that way," she said, pulling out the delicate china, teacup and matching pot she'd brought. "Grandma Rose's chamomile blend. Remember how she used to make it for us before big events?" Emily's eyes softened at the mention of their grandmother. "You brought her tea set. Oh, Sarah, you think of everything." Sarah filled the electric kettle, her movements deliberate and calm. The sleeping pills had been crushed to a fine powder hours earlier, mixed carefully into the loose tea leaves. The dosage was precise, enough to ensure Emily would sleep well past the ceremony's start time, but not enough to cause any lasting harm. Sarah had researched it extensively, checking and double-checking the calculations. "Here," she said, presenting the steaming cup to Emily. "Drink it while it's hot. Grandma always said that was the secret." Emily cradled the cup in both hands, inhaling the familiar scent. "Remember all those summer nights at her house? The three of us drinking tea on the porch while she told us stories about her own wedding?" Sarah sat beside her cousin, fighting back an unexpected wave of guilt. She would have loved to be here tomorrow. "She'd be so proud of us both," Emily murmured, taking a long sip. "You've been amazing through all of this, the perfect maid of honor." She leaned her head against Sarah's shoulder, just as she had done countless times throughout their childhood. Sarah watched as Emily slowly drained the cup, each sip bringing them closer to the moment everything would change. Already, she could see her cousin's eyelids growing heavy, her words becoming slightly slurred. "I should probably try to sleep," Emily said eventually, stifling a yawn. "Big day tomorrow." Sarah helped her cousin change into her pajamas, tucking her into bed, as she had done during countless sleepovers in their youth. Emily was already drifting off, her breathing becoming deep and regular. "Sarah?" she murmured, fighting to keep her eyes open. "Love you." "I love you too," Sarah whispered, and was surprised to find she meant it. She stood watching Emily sleep for a long moment, remembering all the times they had shared secrets and dreams in the darkness. Then she carefully packed away the teacup, wrapping it in the silk scarf once more, evidence to be disposed of later, along with the remnants of the drugged tea leaves. In the bathroom, Sarah changed into her own pajamas and went through her nightly routine, methodically removing her makeup and applying her moisturizer. The woman in the mirror looked exactly the same as she had that morning, but everything had changed. There was no going back now. She sent a quick text to James. "Everything's set for tomorrow. Emily's already asleep. Nervous excitement wore her out. See you at the church." His response came quickly. "Thanks for taking such good care of her. You're the best, Sarah. See you tomorrow." Sarah turned off her phone and slipped into the other bed in the suite, listening to Emily's steady breathing in the darkness. In just a few hours, she would wake before dawn and begin the final phase of her plan. The wedding dress would fit her perfectly. She'd made sure of that during the final fitting, suggesting subtle alterations that would accommodate their slight differences in height and build. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last thought was of the teacup, now wrapped and hidden in her bag. Such a delicate thing to carry such weight. But then again, the same could be said for the simple gold ring that would soon rest on her finger, binding her to James forever. Some might call it stealing, but Sarah preferred to think of it as claiming what should have been hers all along. Outside, a car alarm briefly disturbed the night's silence, but Emily didn't stir. The sleeping pills had done their work well. She would sleep peacefully through the night and well into the next day, while Sarah lived out the wedding day that should have been hers from the start. Dawn crept over the hotel's manicured grounds as Sarah slipped out of bed, her heart thundering against her ribs. Emily's phone on the nightstand buzzed persistently, a string of morning of the wedding messages lighting up the screen. Sarah silenced it with practiced efficiency, watching the notifications stack up. Missed calls from the hairstylist, texts from bridesmaids, a sweet good morning message from James. The latter made her pause, thumb hovering over the screen. "Can't wait to see you today, my love." Such simple words, but soon they would be meant for her. In the other bed, Emily remained motionless, her breathing deep and regular. The sleeping pills had worked perfectly. Not that Sarah had doubted they would. She'd calculated the dosage with the same precision she'd once used to help James study for his pharmacology exams. The first knock came at 6:45 a.m. "Emily? Sarah? The hair and makeup team is here." Margaret, Emily's mother, called through the door. Sarah took a deep breath, smoothing her features into a mask of concern before opening the door. "Aunt Margaret, I'm worried about Emily. She's running a fever and has been in the bathroom all night. Must be nerves and something she ate." Margaret's face creased with worry. "Oh no. Should we call a doctor? I already gave her something to help her sleep. She just needs rest," Sarah said, the lies flowing smoothly. "I'll stay with her. Maybe we can delay the hair and makeup team for an hour." The next 2 hours became a carefully orchestrated dance of deception. Sarah fielded concerned visitors at the door, while simultaneously preparing herself for the ceremony. She'd planned for this, had rehearsed every detail, but the reality was more chaotic than she'd imagined. Still no answer. Lisa, one of the bridesmaids, said after her 5th attempt to reach Emily's phone. She peered anxiously at the door to the suite's bathroom, where Sarah had claimed Emily was still battling nausea. "Maybe we should check on her." Sarah shook her head, adjusting her robe as the hairstylist worked on her updo. "She's finally getting some rest. The last thing she needs is an audience." She forced a sympathetic smile. "You know how Emily gets. She'd be mortified if everyone saw her like this." The wedding coordinator, Patricia, paced the room with increasing agitation, her clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield. "We're an hour behind schedule. The photographer's already at the church. The flowers are being delivered, and the organist needs to know if we're delaying the ceremony." "Everything will be fine," Sarah assured her, though her own stomach churned with nervous excitement. "Emily just needs a little more time. Why don't you head to the church and make sure everything else is ready? I'll handle things here." As the morning wore on, Sarah watched the increasing panic through a lens of careful detachment. Every frantic call, every worried whisper played directly into her plan. The more chaos now, the less likely anyone would be to question her presence at the altar later. Emily's phone continued its silent vibration on the nightstand. Each missed call and text message, another strand in the web of confusion Sarah had woven. She glanced at it occasionally, noting the increasing urgency of the messages. 15 m. James. "Hope you're feeling better, sweetheart. Everyone's sending their love." 8:45 m. Mum. "Emily, please answer your phone. We're all worried." Zick. 9:20 a.m. Lisa. "Girl, where are you?" "The church is filling up." 9:45 m. Dad. "Princess, please let us know you're okay. We need to make a decision about the ceremony." Sarah picked up the phone one last time, sending a message that would buy her the final minutes she needed. "Still not feeling well, but getting dressed now. Please start seating the guests. Don't want to delay things too much. Sarah's helping me." Then she silenced the phone completely and slipped it into the bottom of Emily's overnight bag. By the time anyone thought to check there, it would be too late. In the mirror, Sarah studied her reflection as the makeup artist applied the finishing touches. She looked exactly like herself, yet somehow different, refined, elegant, bridal. The woman Emily had always been meant to be today. But plans could change, destinies could be rewritten. "I think we're ready," the makeup artist said, stepping back to admire her work. Sarah smiled, touching the elegant chignon at the nape of her neck. "Yes, I believe we are." The wedding dress hung nearby, its intricate lace catching the late morning light. Sarah had helped Emily choose it, had stood in the bridal boutique offering thoughtful suggestions about cuts and styles. All the while, knowing, planning, measuring how it would fit her own frame, as she slipped into the gown, Sarah felt a moment of genuine regret. Not for what she was about to do, but for the fact that it had come to this. If only James had seen her that first day, had looked at her the way he looked at Emily. But regret wouldn't change the past. Action would change the future. The veil was the final piece, its lengthy layers of tulle providing the perfect shield. In for her deception, as she arranged it over her face, Sarah caught one last glimpse of Emily's phone, now buried beneath a pile of discarded clothing. Each missed call and unread message was another tick of the clock, counting down to the moment when everything would change. Outside the suite, she could hear the increasing commotion, worried voices, hurried footsteps, the growing anxiety of a wedding day spiraling out of control. But inside, Sarah stood calm and ready, a bride in borrowed white, preparing to claim the life she believed should have been hers all along. Emily's consciousness returned in fragments, like pieces of a shattered mirror slowly being pieced together. The first thing she noticed was the heavy weight of her limbs, as if she'd been sleeping for days. Then came the harsh sunlight streaming through the half-drawn curtains, far too bright for early morning. Finally, the silence, deep and wrong, where there should have been the bustling excitement of her wedding day. Her wedding day. The realization hit her like a physical blow, forcing her eyes open despite their leaden weight. The bedside clocks. Red digits swam into focus. 11:47 a.m. The ceremony was scheduled for noon. No, 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 Emily mumbled, her tongue feeling thick and clumsy in her mouth. She tried to sit up, but the room spun violently. Her wedding dress lay crumpled on the floor where it had fallen from its hanger, the careful pressing ruined, like a deflated dream. Last night's memories came back in disjointed flashes. Sarah bringing her tea in Grandma Rose's cup. The familiar comfort of chamomile, an unexpected drowsiness that had seemed so natural at the time. Now, with the benefit of horrifying hindsight, everything took on a different meaning. Emily's hand shot out for her phone, knocking over an empty water glass. In her panic, the nightstand was bare. She forced herself to roll over, fighting waves of dizziness as she searched the room. Her overnight bag had been emptied, its contents strewn across the floor like evidence at a crime scene. No phone, no purse, no Sarah. Sarah. The truth crystallized with terrible clarity. All those long hours Sarah had spent helping with the wedding. Preparations, her insistence on staying in the suite last night, the tea that had tasted just slightly off, but Emily had trusted her cousin too much to question it. "Help!" she tried to call out, but her voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. The drugs, whatever Sarah had given her, still hadn't fully worn off. Emily grabbed the bedpost and pulled herself upright, ignoring the way the room tilted, and swayed around her. The wedding dress caught her eye again, its delicate lace now hopelessly wrinkled where it had fallen. Emily staggered toward it, dropping to her knees beside the ruined fabric. She'd spent months searching for the perfect dress, had cried when she finally found this one. Sarah had been there, offering opinions, taking photos, helping with measurements, all. While planning this betrayal, Emily's fingers clutched the dress, her engagement ring catching on a loose thread. The ring James had given her dropping to one knee in the hospital garden where they'd first met. The day Sarah had introduced them, Sarah, who had spent so much time with James during their medical school study sessions. Sarah, who had always lingered at family gatherings, inserting herself into their conversations. Sarah, whose smile had never quite reached her eyes when looking at their engagement photos. The pieces had been there all along, but Emily had been too blinded by family loyalty to see them. She tried to stand again, using the dress as leverage. This time her legs held, though the room still swam at the edges of her vision. The hotel room phone sat on the desk across the room, an impossible distance, but her only hope. Emily began the arduous journey, one hand trailing along the wall for support. Each step was a battle against the drugs still coursing through her system. The carpet seemed to shift beneath her feet like quicksand, and her vision blurred in and out of focus. But the thought of Sarah in her dress, standing beside James at the altar, drove her forward. The phone felt impossibly heavy when she finally reached it. Emily's trembling fingers misdialed twice before she managed to punch in James's. Number. The line rang once, twice, then went to voicemail. Of course. He would have his phone off during the ceremony. She tried her mother next, then her father. Each call went straight to voicemail. The ceremony must have already started. Everyone's phones would be silenced, their attention focused on the wrong bride. Emily sank to the floor, the phone cord stretching taut above her. The wedding dress lay across the room like a fallen angel, its wrinkles casting shadows that seemed to mock her helplessness. She had to get to the church, had to stop this masquerade before it was too late. But how? She could barely walk. Her phone and purse were gone, probably taken by Sarah to prevent exactly this kind of intervention. She was alone in a hotel room, dressed in rumpled pajamas, while her cousin prepared to steal her life. The dress caught her eye again, and with it came a surge of determination. She hadn't spent the last year planning this wedding, the last 2 years building a life with James, to let it all be stolen by a twisted act of jealousy. Emily used the desk to pull herself up again, her movement stronger now as adrenaline began to override the lingering effects of the drugs. She couldn't wear the ruined wedding dress, but her overnight bag held other options. If she could just get to the church. The hotel room door had never seemed heavier as she pulled it open, stepping out into a hallway that spun less violently than before. Emily Mitchell might not make it to her wedding on time, but she would damn well make it before the words, "I do," were spoken. St. Matthew's Cathedral hummed with nervous energy as guests filtered into the wooden pews. Sarah stood in the bride's room, examining one of the wedding programs that had been delivered that morning. Her own handiwork, she'd insisted on handling. The printing herself, claiming it would save Emily money. The elegant script listed all the participants, the order of service, and there, in the smallest font at the bottom of the page, Emily Grace Mitchell and James Andrew Harrison unite in holy matrimony. Soon that printed name would become a historical footnote, a detail lost in the drama of what was about to unfold. Sarah placed the program carefully on the antique vanity, adjusting her veil in the mirror. The reflection showed her everything she'd worked for. A bride perfect in every detail, from the precisely curled tendrils framing her face to the subtle shimmer of her borrowed pearl earrings. Emily's something borrowed, though she hadn't exactly asked. A knock at the door made her start. 5 minutes, Patricia, the wedding coordinator, called, her voice tight with stress. Is Emily feeling better? Much better, Sarah replied, pitching her voice to match her cousin's softer tones. The similarity in their voices had always been remarkable, a family trait that was proving invaluable today. I'll be ready on time. Through the door, she could hear the mounting activity, the string quartet tuning their instruments, the rustle of programs being passed down the pews, the murmured conversations of guests wondering about the delayed start. Everything was proceeding according to her carefully orchestrated plan, albeit an hour behind schedule. Sarah smoothed invisible wrinkles from the wedding dress, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to do. The program had listed the traditional wedding party: mother of the bride, father of the bride, bridesmaids, groomsmen. All of them would walk down the aisle before her, none the wiser that they were participating in an elaborate substitution. Another knock, more insistent this time. "Emily?" It was Uncle Robert, her cousin's father, coming to walk the wrong daughter down the aisle. "Princess, are you ready?" Sarah took a final deep breath, checking that the veil hung properly to obscure her features. "Ready, Dad?" she called, the familiar endearment tasting strange on her tongue. She opened the door to find him waiting in his perfectly pressed tuxedo, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he said, offering his arm. "James is a lucky man." "Yes," Sarah agreed softly, taking his arm. "He is." The wedding coordinator hurried past, distributing the last of the programs to the ushers. Sarah watched as the elegant cream-colored booklets were handed out, each one containing the printed lie she was about to bring to life. In the distance, The string quartet began the processional music for the wedding party. One by one, the bridesmaids emerged from the preparation area, each carrying their carefully arranged bouquet of white roses and baby's breath. Lisa, Emma, and Rachel, all Emily's friends, all smiling encouragingly at who they thought was their beloved friend, hidden behind the veil. Sarah nodded to each of them, not trusting herself to speak more than necessary. The groomsmen followed. Michael, James's brother and best man. Thomas and David, his college roommates. They took their places at the front of the church, unaware that they were about to witness something very different from what was printed in those pristine programs. Through the cathedral's heavy wooden doors, Sarah could hear the organist transitioning to the next piece, preparing for the bridal procession. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her steps remained steady as she and Uncle Robert took their place behind the last pair of attendants. "I know you were sick earlier," Uncle Robert whispered, patting her hand where it rested on his arm. "But you seem much calmer now." Sarah squeezed his arm in response, letting him interpret her silence as bridal nerves. In truth, she had never felt more certain of anything in her life. Ahead of them, the last bridesmaid disappeared through the doors. The wedding coordinator gestured for them to take their position. The familiar strains of the wedding march began to play, and the assembled guests rose to their feet. Sarah could see them all through her veil. Aunt Margaret in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with an embroidered handkerchief, cousins and family friends filling the pews. And there at the altar James, handsome in his tuxedo, watching the doors expectantly for his bride. But he wasn't watching for her. He was watching for Emily, whose name was printed in that elegant program, whose place Sarah was about to take. The guilt that had nagged at her earlier was gone now, replaced by a singular focus. She had come too far to turn back. "Ready, Princess," Uncle Robert whispered, as the wedding coordinator pulled open the heavy cathedral doors. Sarah tightened her grip on his arm, her voice steady as she replied, "Ready." The programs rustled like autumn leaves as the guests turned to watch her entrance, each one holding the printed evidence of her deception. But programs could be corrected, histories could be rewritten, and in a few moments, Sarah Mitchell would begin the process of claiming the life she believed should have been hers all along. The first notes of Wagner's bridal chorus echoed through St. Matthew's Cathedral, each measure marking Sarah's steps toward destiny. In the choir loft above, the organist's fingers moved across yellowed sheet music that had accompanied countless brides before her, though perhaps none quite like this. The familiar melody floated down from the pipe organ, unaware it was participating in an impersonation. The cathedral's center aisle stretched before her like a dream, sunlight filtering through stained glass windows to cast kaleidoscope patterns across the marble floor. Through her veil, Sarah could see the assembled guests rising to their feet, their faces turned expectantly toward who they believed was Emily. Uncle Robert's arm remained steady beneath her hand as they began their procession, step by measured. Step! Sarah forced herself to move at the proper bridal pace, though her heart raced with each passing moment. The music seemed to pulse through her very being. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, as she'd practiced alone in her apartment countless nights, perfecting the rhythm that would make her transformation complete. James stood at the altar, his expression visible even from this distance, a mixture of love and awe that made Sarah's chest ache. He was watching for Emily in this white dress, waiting to see his chosen bride appear through the veil. But Sarah knew something he didn't, that sometimes the heart could be wrong, could choose incorrectly. She was here to help him correct that mistake. Each pew they passed heightened the tension in her shoulders. Aunt Margaret's soft sobs carried clearly over the organ music. Cousins smiled encouragingly, smartphones raised to capture what they thought was Emily's perfect moment. Sarah recognized faces from years of family gatherings, each one a witness to her deception, none suspecting the truth behind the veil. The wedding march continued its stately progression, marking time as Sarah advanced toward her goal. She'd chosen this piece deliberately during the planning stages, knowing its length would give her the coverage she needed. 4 minutes and 27 seconds of musical camouflage, each note helping to sell the illusion that everything was proceeding as it should. Halfway down the aisle, Sarah caught a glimpse of Lisa in the front row, the chief bridesmaid's expression slightly puzzled. Had she noticed something off in Sarah's gait? Some small tell that differentiated her from Emily? Sarah adjusted her steps minutely, calling to mind all the times she'd watched her cousin walk, all the subtle mannerisms she'd studied and practiced. The organ music swelled as they approached the altar steps, and Sarah could now see James clearly through her veil. His eyes shone with unshed tears, his smile radiant as he watched what he thought was his true love approaching. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight. Soon that smile would be genuinely for her, once he understood that she was the one who truly knew him, who had always been meant to stand beside him. 3 steps from the altar, Uncle Robert's pace faltered slightly. Sarah felt his arm tense beneath her hand, sensed a moment of confusion in his hesitation. Did something about her movement, her presence, suddenly feel foreign to him? 28 years of fatherhood had attuned him to his daughter's essence. Was some primitive paternal instinct now warning him that this was not his Emily? But the moment passed. The music carried them forward, and they mounted the altar steps together. Sarah could smell James's cologne now, the familiar scent she'd first noticed during those long study sessions in medical school. He'd worn the same brand the day he'd met Emily in the hospital cafeteria, the day Sarah's world had begun to unravel. The final notes of the bridal chorus hung in the air as Uncle Robert turned toward her. This was the moment she'd rehearsed. Most carefully in her mind, the father of the bride, lifting the veil to kiss his daughter goodbye. Sarah held her breath as his hands reached for the delicate tool, but before he could lift it, she turned her head slightly, a perfect imitation of Emily's shy gesture, one she'd seen her cousin perform countless times. Uncle Robert chuckled softly, recognizing what he thought was his daughter's characteristic modesty, and instead kissed her through the veil. Sarah accepted his embrace, relief flooding through her as she cleared this crucial hurdle. "Who gives this woman to be married?" the priest intoned, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed cathedral. "Her mother and I do," Uncle Robert replied, his voice thick with emotion. He placed Sarah's hand in James's, completing the transfer of trust, unknowingly participating in the greatest deception of his life. James's fingers were warm as they closed around hers, and Sarah had to suppress a shiver of anticipation. How many times had she imagined this moment? How many nights had she lain awake, planning every detail, anticipating every potential obstacle? The organ music faded to silence, the last echo dying away in the cathedral's vaulted ceiling. The sheet music that had guided so many honest brides down this aisle had just accompanied its first impostor, its ancient notes unknowing accomplices in Sarah's carefully orchestrated performance. As she took her place beside James at the altar, Sarah allowed herself a moment of triumph. The hardest part was over. She had successfully navigated the walk that had given her the most anxiety, had fooled even Emily's own father. Now there remained only the ceremony itself, the exchange of vows, and finally, the kiss that would seal her victory. The priest opened his Bible, and Sarah felt James squeeze her hand gently through the veil. She returned the pressure, knowing he was trying to reassure who he thought was Emily. The irony might have made her smile if she weren't so focused on maintaining her cousin's demeanor, her cousin's presence. Below the altar, the organist quietly gathered the wedding march sheet music, her part in this performance complete. She had played for hundreds of weddings in this cathedral, but never before had those familiar notes accompanied such an audacious act of impersonation. The music had done its job, providing the perfect backdrop for Sarah's transformation from maid of honor to bride. Now, as the priest began to speak the ancient words of the marriage ceremony, Sarah stood perfectly still, every muscle controlled, every breath measured. She was no longer simply playing a part. She was becoming who she believed she should have been all along. The music had ended, but her performance was far from over. The taxi receipt tore as Emily fumbled it into her pocket, her hands still shaking from the drug's lingering effects. £47.50 to St. Matthew's Cathedral. It read in smudged ink, a paper trail of desperation. She'd had to beg the hotel clerk to pay for the cab, promising to repay him later, using every ounce of lucidity she could muster to appear convincing rather than crazy. "Can't you go any faster?" she asked the driver, watching the city blur past her window. She'd managed to throw on a wrinkled sundress from her overnight bag, her hair still tangled from drug-induced sleep. The dashboard clock read 12:22 p.m. The ceremony would have started by now. "Traffic's bad around the cathedral," the driver said, gesturing at the line of cars ahead. "Big wedding today." My wedding, Emily thought, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Her mind kept replaying fragments of the previous night. Sarah's solicitous smile as she handed over the tea, the subtle, bitter aftertaste she'd dismissed, the overwhelming drowsiness that had seemed so natural at the time. The taxi inched forward through downtown traffic, while memories of her relationship with James flickered through Emily's mind like an old film reel. Their first meeting in the hospital cafeteria, where Sarah had introduced them with what Emily now recognized as reluctance. The long evenings when Sarah would join their dinner dates, always sitting just a little too close to James, laughing just a little too warmly at his jokes. "You know," the driver said, glancing at Emily in the rearview mirror, "there's a back road to the cathedral. Might cost extra, but—" "Take it," Emily interrupted, her fingers clenching around the torn receipt in her pocket. The papers ragged, edge bit into her skin, a tangible reminder that this was real, not some nightmare she could wake from. The taxi swerved suddenly, cutting down a narrow side street. Each turn jostled Emily's still unsteady balance, but she welcomed the movement. Anything was better than sitting in standstill traffic while Sarah stood in her place at the altar. Her engagement ring caught the sunlight as she braced herself. Against the door, the diamond James had chosen so carefully, now seeming like an accusation. How had she not seen this coming? Sarah had been there for every moment of their relationship, helping with date plans, offering relationship advice, assisting with wedding preparations. The perfect cousin, the supportive maid of honor, the patient friend, the perfect deceiver, almost. "There," the driver announced, as the cathedral's spires came into view. Emily's heart leaped into her throat. Even from this distance, she could see the line of cars parked along the street, the well-dressed guests who had arrived late, still hurrying up the steps. The taxi had barely stopped when Emily threw open the door, stumbling slightly as her feet hit the pavement. The torn receipt fluttered from her pocket, catching on the breeze before settling into a puddle beside the curb. $47.50 worth of desperate hope, dissolving. In dirty water, Emily grabbed the iron railing that lined the cathedral steps, using it to pull herself upward. Her legs were stronger now, but still unreliable, each step a conscious effort. The massive wooden doors loomed ahead, ornately carved with scenes of saints and salvation. Behind them she could hear the muffled sounds of organ music. A flash of movement caught her eye. Someone slipping through a side door. The wedding coordinator, Patricia. Emily recognized her even from behind. Without thinking, Emily changed direction, forcing her unsteady legs to carry her toward that smaller entrance. The main doors would be too conspicuous, too theatrical. She needed stealth now, needed to find a way to stop this without causing a scene that would hurt everyone involved. The side door opened silently under her hand, leading into a narrow corridor lined with religious paintings. The organ music was clearer now, accompanied by a familiar voice speaking well-remembered words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Emily pressed a hand against the stone wall, using it for support as she crept toward the sound. Her sundress clung to her skin, damp with exertion and fear. The torn taxi receipt might be dissolving in a puddle outside, but its purpose had been served. It had brought her here, to this moment, to this choice. Ahead, light spilled from an archway that she knew led to the side of the altar. Emily could see the edge of the wedding party now, the bridesmaids in there, carefully chosen blue dresses, the groomsmen standing tall in matched tuxedos, and there in the center of it all, a figure in white standing beside James. The veil obscured the bride's face, but Emily knew with sickening certainty that it wasn't. Her features hidden behind that delicate tulle. She watched as James reached for the bride's hand, his familiar gesture of affection directed at an impostor. Emily's fingers found the torn edge of another receipt in her pocket. The hotel clerks hastily scrawled IOU, 2 pieces of paper that traced her journey here, to this threshold between what was and what should have been. The priest's voice carried clearly now, speaking words that should have been part of her story, not Sarah's twisted revision of it. Sweat-dampened hair fell in her eyes as Emily took one more step forward, her cousin's deception about to shatter like the teacup that had started all of this. The drugs still pulled at the edges of her consciousness, but clarity was winning, anger burning away the last of her confusion. Sarah might have stolen her wedding day, but she hadn't counted on Emily's determination. The torn taxi receipt had marked the beginning of her journey back to James. Now, standing in the shadows of her own wedding, Emily prepared to write its ending. The marriage license lay pristine in its leather folder on the altar's side table, waiting for signatures that would make history, or fraud, depending on one's perspective. Sarah had studied Emily's signature for weeks, practicing until she could replicate its distinctive swoop and curve. Now, as the priest continued the ceremony, that document waited like a loaded gun, its blank lines ready to make legal what Sarah had orchestrated through deception. "Marriage," the priest intoned, his voice carrying through the cathedral's perfect acoustics, "is a sacred bond entered into with both gravity and joy." He smiled benevolently at the couple before him, unaware that the bride behind the veil was not the one named on his paperwork. James's hand remained steady in Sarah's, his thumb occasionally brushing across her knuckles in what he surely meant as reassurance for his anxious bride. Each touch sent electricity through Sarah's body, validation that she'd made the right choice. She'd spent years watching him make that same gesture to Emily across restaurant tables and family gatherings. Now it was finally meant for her. "Before we proceed with the vows," the priest continued, "I must ask if anyone knows just cause why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony. Let them speak now or forever hold their peace." Sarah held her breath through the traditional pause, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain James must hear it. This was the moment she'd feared most, when someone might notice something amiss, when her careful plans could unravel with a single observant comment. The silence stretched, broken only by the gentle weeping of Aunt Margaret in the front pew. Sarah fought the urge to turn and look at the assembled guests, to check for any sign of suspicion. Instead, she kept her gaze forward, maintained her pose as the demure bride, echo of Emily's characteristic shyness. "Very well," the priest said, closing the preparatory part of the ceremony. He gestured to the altar server, who brought forward the marriage license in its leather case. "We'll begin with the signing of the civil documents, then proceed to the sacred vows." This was the moment Sarah had rehearsed most carefully after the walk down the aisle. She would need to sign Emily's name perfectly, without hesitation, without the telltale pause of a forger considering their strokes. The marriage license would make everything legal, would bind her to James in ways that could not easily be undone. The priest opened the leather folder, revealing the document within. Sarah saw her target. The single line with the bride's signature would transform her from Sarah Mitchell to Emily Mitchell Harrison. All those nights practicing Emily's signature would finally pay off. James reached for the pen first, his doctor's scrawl flowing across his designated line with confident strokes. Sarah watched his hand move, remembering all the prescriptions and chart notes she'd seen him write during their study sessions. He handed the pen to her with a smile, and Sarah forced her fingers not to tremble as she took it. Just as she leaned forward to sign, a movement caught her attention from the side altar. A flash of colour, a hint of motion that seemed out of place among the formal wedding party. Sarah's hand froze millimeters above the paper, her carefully planned fraud suddenly suspended between intention and action. But no outcry came, no dramatic interruption materialized. She was letting her nerves get the better of her. Sarah took a steadying breath and bent to the document again. The marriage license waited, its blank line a gateway to everything she'd ever wanted. She began to sign, Emily's practiced signature flowing from muscle memory. The first E swooped exactly as it should, followed by the distinctive M that Sarah had spent hours perfecting. Each letter brought her closer to her goal, closer to making legal what her heart had always known should be true. The witness lines were already filled. She'd had the bridal party sign them earlier, during the confusion of the delayed start. The marriage license was the last piece of her plan, the document that would make everything official before she had to speak the vows that might betray her. As she finished the signature, Sarah allowed herself a moment of triumph. The forgery was perfect, indistinguishable from Emily's real signature. Even if someone thought to check later, to compare it against other documents, they would find no discrepancy to support their suspicions. The priest took back the leather folder, nodding, in satisfaction at the completed document. "Now," he said, closing the folder with a soft thump that seemed to echo Sarah's racing heart, "we shall proceed with the sacred vows that will bind you together before God and these witnesses." Sarah turned slightly toward James, positioning herself exactly as she'd practiced in front of her mirror countless times. Through the veil, she could see his face clearly now, the love in his eyes, the slight tension around his mouth that always appeared when he was deeply moved. All that emotion directed at her, even if he didn't know it yet. The marriage license lay closed beside the priest's Bible, its fresh ink drying, its legal weight already settling around Sarah like a shield. Let them try to undo this later, she thought. Let them try to argue with a properly signed civil document, with witnesses and a church record, and everything done exactly according to law. The priest raised his hands, preparing to begin the vows, and Sarah straightened her spine. The hardest part was over. The signature that would bind her legally to James was complete. Now she just had to make it through the vows, through the final moments that would transform her from the overlooked cousin to the rightful bride. But somewhere in the cathedral, in a corner of Sarah's awareness, she was trying desperately to ignore. Something shifted, a whisper of movement, a hint of tension in the air. The marriage license might make things legal, but Sarah suddenly wondered if legality would be enough to guarantee her happy ending. James reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, its edges worn soft from countless readings and revisions. Sarah recognized it immediately. She'd seen him working on his vows late at night at the hospital, had even offered suggestions when he'd asked for her help as the maid of honor. The paper trembled slightly in his hands as he unfolded it, and Sarah's heart clenched at this sign of emotion. "Emily," he began, his voice thick with feeling, "from the moment you walked into that hospital cafeteria with a box of homemade cookies and that brilliant smile, I knew my life would never be the same." He paused, swallowing hard, while Sarah fought to maintain her composure behind the veil. She had been there that day too, had watched her cousin steal James's heart with one casual gesture of kindness. You brought light into my world when I was drowning in medical textbooks and overnight shifts, James continued. You showed me that life isn't just about healing bodies, it's about healing souls, about finding joy in small moments, about creating a family of your own. Sarah's hands tightened around her bouquet. She knew these words by heart, had read them when James had asked for her opinion weeks ago. But hearing them now, directed at her, even if he didn't know it yet, made them feel brand new. I promise to be your partner in all things, James read, his voice growing stronger. To support your dreams as you've supported mine. To laugh with you during the good times and hold you during the hard ones. To be the kind of husband who deserves the incredible love you've shown me. In the front pew, Aunt Margaret's quiet sobs provided a counterpoint to James's words. Sarah risked a glance toward her and saw Uncle Robert patting his wife's hand, his own eyes suspiciously bright. They thought they were watching their daughter's dream come true, not knowing they were witnessing an elaborate substitution. Most of all, James said, looking up from his paper to gaze directly at the veiled face before him, I promise to love you with the same openness and generosity you've always shown to everyone around you. Your kindness, Emily, is what made me fall in love with you. The way you light up every room you enter, the way you make everyone feel special and valued. He trailed off, and Sarah noticed a slight furrow appear between his brows. Was something feeling off to him? Could he sense, somehow, that the woman before him wasn't the one whose kindness he was praising? The priest turned to Sarah. And now the bride will share her vows. Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for her own piece of paper. Not the original vows Emily had written, but Sarah's careful recreation of what she imagined her cousin would say. She'd studied Emily's writing style, her speech patterns, the way she expressed emotion. The vows had to be perfect, had to sound authentic enough to avoid raising suspicion. James, she began, pitching her voice to match Emily's softer tones. You came into my life when I wasn't looking for love. The words felt like ashes in her mouth, because Emily hadn't been looking, had simply stumbled into the relationship Sarah had wanted so desperately. You showed me what real partnership means, she continued, the practiced words flowing smoothly, how two people can support each other's dreams while building new ones together. Your dedication to healing others inspired me to be a better person, to look beyond myself and see how I could make a difference in the world. As she spoke, Sarah became aware of a subtle shift in the atmosphere of the cathedral. Something was different, a tension in the air, a held breath among the guests. She forced herself to keep reading, to maintain the illusion for just a few minutes more. I promise to be your safe harbor after long hospital shifts, to remind you of the joy in life when your work becomes overwhelming, to love you not just for who you are, but for who we become together. James's slight frown deepened. Sarah saw his hands twitch, as if he wanted to reach for her, but something held him back. Did her voice sound wrong? Was her cadence off? She'd practiced these words hundreds of times, but now, in this crucial moment, doubt crept in. I promise. She faltered for a moment as a movement caught her eye. There, in the shadows near the side altar, a figure stood partially concealed behind a pillar. Sarah's heart stopped, then started again at double speed. No, it couldn't be. The sleeping pills should have kept Emily unconscious for hours yet. Please, the priest prompted gently, continue with your vows. Sarah drew a shaky breath, forcing her attention back to the paper in her hands. I promise to be faithful and true, she read, the irony of the words not lost on her. To stand beside you through whatever life brings us, to build a future filled with love and laughter and— Emily? James interrupted softly. Something in his voice made Sarah's blood run cold. Are you feeling all right? Just emotional, she managed to whisper, but she could hear the difference now, the slight variation in tone that gave her away. After months of practicing Emily's voice, she was letting her own slip through. The handwritten vows shook in her grasp, the carefully crafted words blurring before her eyes. She'd thought these vows would be her triumph, the final step in becoming Mrs. James Harrison. Instead, they were becoming her undoing, each promise highlighting the magnitude of her deception. In the shadows, the figure moved slightly, and Sarah caught a glimpse of a familiar sundress. Her cousin was here, watching this performance, waiting to reveal the truth. The vows in Sarah's hands suddenly felt like evidence rather than declaration, each loving word a testimony against her. But she was too close to give up now. Sarah straightened her spine and continued reading, her voice stronger with determination. She would finish these vows, would speak these promises into reality. The words might have been crafted in deception, but the feelings behind them were real, more real than anything she'd ever known. The brass door handle felt cold under Emily's trembling fingers as she stood in the shadows of the side altar. This small piece of metal, worn smooth by generations of hands seeking entrance to sacred spaces, now represented her last barrier between truth and deception. She watched through increasingly clear eyes as Sarah continued reading the stolen vows, each word a fresh betrayal. Emily's legs had finally stopped shaking, the drug's fog lifting enough for rational thought to return. She could see everything. Now, James's subtle confusion, Sarah's slightly too rigid posture, the way her cousin's voice occasionally slipped from its careful imitation. The entire performance was beginning to fray at the edges, to build a future filled with love and laughter. Sarah read, and Emily felt bile rise in her throat. Those were her words, her promises, crafted during quiet moments when she'd imagined this day. She'd even shown early drafts to Sarah, trusting her cousin's opinion, never suspecting those private thoughts would be weaponized against her. The door handle's brass decoration caught the light as Emily shifted position, its pattern of intertwined hearts now seeming like a mockery. How many brides had grasped this same handle, their hearts full of joy rather than betrayal? How many had walked through these doors to honest ceremonies, to true beginnings? James's frown deepened as Sarah continued reading. Emily could read his expression even from her hidden position, the growing sense that something wasn't quite right, though he couldn't yet identify what. She'd seen that same look countless times during their relationship, usually when he was puzzling through a difficult diagnosis at the hospital. And to cherish every moment we have together, Sarah's voice carried clearly through the cathedral. But Emily could hear the strain in it now. Her cousin's perfect mimicry was slipping, reality bleeding through the carefully constructed facade. Emily's fingers tightened on the door handle, its cool metal grounding her in this surreal moment. The last remnants of the sleeping pills were finally clearing from her system, leaving behind a clarity that burned like ice. She saw now how Sarah had orchestrated everything, the late-night wedding preparations that gave her access to every detail, the careful cultivation of trust, the subtle manipulation of everyone's expectations. Through the gap in the doorway, Emily could see the marriage license lying closed beside the priest's Bible. Her stomach clenched. Had Sarah already signed it? Had she already committed fraud in Emily's name? The thought sparked something fierce inside her, burning away the last traces of drug-induced lethargy. "To stand beside you through whatever life brings us," Sarah continued, but her voice wavered slightly. Emily saw her cousin's head turn fractionally toward the shadows where she stood. Sarah knew she was here, knew her carefully constructed plan was moments away from shattering. The door handle's metal grew warm under Emily's palm as she gathered her courage. She thought of all the moments that had led to this. The day she'd met James in the hospital cafeteria, Sarah's too bright smile as she introduced them, the countless family gatherings where her cousin had positioned herself just a little too close to Emily's boyfriend. In the front pew, Emily could see her mother dabbing at tears with a handkerchief, her father's proud smile as he watched what he thought was his daughter's wedding. The sight nearly broke her. They had no idea they were participating in an elaborate fraud, that the woman in the wedding dress was not their daughter, but their niece. I promise to be true. Sarah's voice cracked slightly on the word true, and Emily saw James's head tilt slightly, his medical training perhaps recognizing something in that voice that didn't quite match his fiancée's usual tones. The door handle seemed to pulse under Emily's grip like a heartbeat of brass and steel. How many others had stood here, she wondered, their hands on this same metal, preparing to interrupt a ceremony? How many had found the courage to push through, to speak their truth in this sacred space? Through the gap, Emily could see Sarah's hands shaking as she held the paper with the stolen vows. The veil still obscured her cousin's face, but Emily could read the tension in her posture, the slight tremor in her fingers. The perfect performance was unraveling, thread by thread. James took a half step forward, concern evident in his movement. "Emily?" he asked softly, and Sarah's entire body went rigid at the sound of his voice speaking that name, Emily's name, not hers. The door handle turned slightly under Emily's grip, the mechanism's click barely audible over the rustle of wedding clothes and the soft murmur of confused guests. This piece of brass that had admitted so many to moments of joy was about to become the gateway to chaos. Sarah's voice faltered again, and this time the slip was obvious. Several heads turned in the wedding party, puzzled expressions replacing ceremonial solemnity. The careful illusion was dissolving, reality asserting itself through the cracks in Sarah's performance. Emily felt the door handle's decorative hearts press into her palm as she tightened her grip. The time for hiding in shadows had passed. She thought of the drugged tea, the stolen dress, the forged signatures, each betrayal adding fuel to the fire of her resolve. The brass handle that had witnessed countless ceremonies, both joyous and solemn, was about to participate in something entirely different. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself for what was to come. Then with deliberate force, she pushed the door fully open, letting its ancient hinges announce her presence to the assembled guests. The sound echoed through the cathedral like a gunshot, causing Sarah to drop the paper with Emily's stolen vows. As heads turned and gasps filled the air, Emily stepped through the doorway, leaving behind the shadows and the cold brass handle that had been her last link to hesitation. The wedding videographer's camera whirred softly from its discreet position near the altar, its unblinking eye capturing every detail of what was about to become a very different kind of wedding video. The red recording light blinked steadily, documenting the moment when carefully constructed lies began to crumble beneath the weight of truth. Time seemed to slow as Emily's appearance threw the cathedral into chaos. The videographer's camera panned smoothly between the two identical figures, one in a wrinkled sundress, the other in stolen white lace, creating a split screen of reality versus deception that would be replayed at family gatherings for years to come. "I'm sorry," the priest stammered, looking between the two women, "but what is the meaning of—" "James," Emily called out, her voice hoarse but gaining strength. "James, that's not me under the veil." The camera captured it all, the collective gasp from the guests, the way Sarah's shoulders stiffened beneath the stolen dress, the subtle shift in James's posture as confusion gave way to dawning realization. These were the moments that would be rewound and replayed, analyzed and discussed long after the day was done. "Emily." James turned toward the sound of her voice, his expression a complex mixture of confusion and recognition. Then he turned back to the veiled bride beside him, his doctor's instincts kicking in as pieces began falling into place. The slight differences in voice, the rigid posture, the something not quite right he'd been sensing throughout the ceremony. Sarah reached for his hand, still trying to maintain the illusion. "James, please." But it was too late. The camera caught the exact moment James's expression changed, the instant he recognized the voice behind the veil for what it was. His hand withdrew from Sarah's grasp as if burned. "Sarah," the name escaped. His lips in a whisper, but in the cathedral's perfect acoustics, it carried to every corner. The videographer's microphone picked up the soft sound, preserving forever the moment when truth finally broke through deception. The wedding video would show what happened next in perfect, unrelenting detail. Sarah's slight sway as her real name, fell from James's lips. The rustle of confusion that swept through the guests like wind through summer leaves. Emily's steady advance up the altar steps, her bare feet silent on the marble floor. "Take off the veil," Emily demanded, her voice stronger now. "Show everyone what you've done." For a moment Sarah remained frozen, the white lace still shielding her face from the assembled guests. The camera captured her hands clenching into fists at her sides, the slight tremor in her shoulders as her carefully constructed world began to collapse. "Sarah," Aunt Margaret's voice came from the front pew, thick with confusion and dawning horror. "But where's Emily been all this time?" "Ask her about the tea," Emily said, gesturing toward her cousin. "Ask her about the sleeping pills she used to drug me last night." The videographer's camera didn't miss a detail. The shock that rippled through the guests, the way James took an instinctive step back from the woman in white, the moment Sarah's composure finally cracked. "It should have been me," Sarah's voice broke as she reached for the veil with trembling hands. "It was always supposed to be me." The camera recorded the fall of white lace in slow motion as Sarah lifted the veil, revealing her face to the assembled guests. The collective intake of breath echoed through the cathedral as everyone saw what Emily had known from the moment she regained consciousness. Her cousin had tried to steal not just her wedding day, but her entire life. "I loved you first," Sarah said, turning to James, her voice raw with emotion. "All those study sessions, all those late nights at the hospital, I was there first. But then Emily walked in with her cookies and her smile, and suddenly I was invisible." The wedding video caught James's expression as understanding dawned. All the times Sarah had inserted herself into their relationship, all the subtle ways she'd tried to come between them, leading to this ultimate betrayal. "You were my best friend," Emily said, her voice breaking. "My cousin, how could I not?" Sarah spun to face her, the wedding dress swirling around her feet. "You've taken everything else. The internship, Grandpa's car, Grandma's ring, everything I ever wanted somehow ended up in your hands. But not this. Not him." The camera captured the way James moved then, stepping away from Sarah to stand beside Emily. His hand found Emily's, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that needed no words. The video would show this moment in perfect clarity. The true couple reunited, while the architect of deception stood alone in her stolen white dress. "Security has been called," the priest said quietly, his voice carrying in the stunned silence. "Perhaps we should clear the cathedral." "No need," Sarah said, her voice hollow. She looked down at the wedding dress, Emily's dress, as if seeing it for the first time. "I know when I've lost." The wedding video would end with this final scene. Sarah walking down the aisle alone, the train of her stolen dress whispering against the marble floor, the confused and horrified faces of the guests she passed, the way Emily and James stood. Together at the altar, their joined hands a testament to what was real and true. But it was the last frame that would be most remembered. Sarah pausing at the cathedral doors, looking back one final time at the life she'd tried to steal. The camera caught the exact moment when regret finally overtook obsession in her eyes, when the weight of what she'd done finally settled onto her shoulders. Then she was gone, leaving behind a cathedral full of shocked guests, a family shattered by betrayal, and a wedding video that would document one of the strangest days in St. Matthew's long history. The sound of shattering glass cut through the stunned silence of the cathedral. A champagne flute, forgotten in the confusion, slipped from the altar server's tray and exploded across the marble floor, its crystalline destruction a perfect metaphor for the moment. Tiny shards scattered like broken dreams, catching the light from the stained glass windows and throwing prisms across the shocked faces of the assembled guests. "Someone should go after her," Aunt Margaret said weakly, still staring. At the cathedral doors, through which her niece had just disappeared. But no one moved. The spilled champagne spread slowly across the floor, seeping between the fragments of broken crystal like secrets finally coming to light. Emily swayed slightly, the last effects of the sleeping pills combining with the emotional toll of the past hour. James's arm went around her waist immediately, supporting her with the same instinctive care that had first drawn them together. "You need to sit down," he said, his doctor's training evident in his tone. "Whatever she gave you is still in your system." A bitter laugh escaped Emily's throat. "My own cousin drugged me at my wedding rehearsal." The reality of it hit her anew, sharp as the broken glass scattered at their feet. "I should have known," James said quietly, leading her to the front pew. "All those times she joined us for dinner, the way she always needed to study at the same time I did, how she managed to be everywhere in our relationship, I just thought she was being supportive." The wedding coordinator hurried forward with a dustpan and brush, carefully beginning to collect the shattered champagne glass. Each tiny piece seemed to hold a reflection of the day's shattered illusions, the perfect wedding destroyed, family, trust broken, relationships splintered beyond easy repair. "The marriage license," the priest suddenly remembered, reaching for the leather folder. "We need to check." "She forged my signature," Emily said tiredly. "I watched her practice for weeks, pretending she was helping me address invitations." The memory brought fresh pain. How many other moments of supposed cousin bonding had actually been Sarah studying, practicing, preparing for this betrayal? Uncle Robert approached slowly, his face aged a decade in the past few minutes. "Emily, honey, I'm so sorry. When I walked her down the aisle, something felt, but I told myself it was just wedding day nerves. She played us all," Aunt Margaret added, dabbing at fresh tears. "Used our trust against us. Even the sleeping pills, she must have gotten them from working at the hospital pharmacy." The broken glass continued to sparkle on the floor as the wedding coordinator swept each piece, a reflection of how thoroughly Sarah had shattered their family's foundation. Years of shared holidays, family traditions, and trusted relationships now lay in ruins, sharp-edged and dangerous to handle. James kept his arm around Emily, his thumb rubbing small circles on her back, the same gesture Sarah had tried to steal at the altar. "We need to call the police," he said quietly. "What she did, it was criminal. The drugging alone, no." Emily's voice was firm despite her exhaustion. "Not yet. She's still family, even after this. We need to understand why, really why, before we decide what to do." Lisa, the chief bridesmaid, approached cautiously, holding out a glass of water. "The other guests," she said hesitantly. "Should we?" Emily looked out at the confused faces filling the pews, at the broken glass still being swept up, at the empty space where Sarah had stood in stolen white. "Tell them," she paused, considering. "Tell them the truth. That my cousin tried to steal my wedding because she couldn't accept that some dreams aren't meant for her." The last piece of the champagne flute caught the light as it was swept into the dustpan, a final glitter of what might have been. The wedding coordinator carried away the broken glass, but its absence left something worse. The space where trust had been now empty and aching. "What happens now?" someone asked softly. Emily looked at James, saw in his eyes the same love that had drawn them together in that hospital cafeteria 2 years ago. The same connection Sarah had tried so desperately to claim for herself. "Now," Emily said, squeezing James's hand, "we start picking up the pieces. All of them." She looked at the empty doorway where Sarah had disappeared, even the sharp ones that cut when you try to handle them. Around them, the cathedral began to stir with renewed purpose. Guests whispered among themselves, some already, reaching for phones to spread the shocking news. The priest carefully packed away the fraudulent marriage license as evidence. The wedding coordinator consulted her clipboard, probably already calculating how to salvage some part of the carefully planned reception. But Emily's attention remained on the space where the champagne glass had shattered. In its glittering destruction, She saw a perfect reflection of this day, something beautiful broken beyond repair, leaving behind both precious fragments to save and dangerous shards to carefully clear away. "We should go," James said gently. "You need rest, and there are decisions to be made." Emily nodded, but her eyes were drawn to one last piece of glass, overlooked in the cleanup, catching the light like a tear on the cathedral floor. In its faceted surface, she saw everything this day had become: a wedding transformed into a revelation, a cousin's love twisted into obsession, a family's trust scattered like broken crystal across sacred ground. As James helped her stand, Emily couldn't help but think that somewhere in the city, Sarah was alone with the weight of what she'd done, carrying her own sharp-edged pieces of this shattered day. And despite everything, despite the betrayal and the drugs and the stolen vows, Emily found herself hoping her cousin wouldn't cut herself too deeply on the ruins of her own deception. In the cathedral's private chapel, Emily sat with her parents and James, staring at the ancient family Bible that had been brought from its display case. Its leather cover was worn smooth by generations of hands, its pages containing a record of births, marriages, and deaths stretching back nearly 2 centuries. Aunt Margaret had insisted on retrieving it, saying through tears that they needed to understand where it all went wrong. "Look," she said now, her finger trembling as it traced a line of faded ink. "The rivalry between Sarah's mother and me. It started long before the girls were born." The Bible's pages rustled as she turned them, revealing careful annotations. In different hands. "Our own grandmother played us against each other, just like her mother did with her sisters." Emily leaned forward, examining the neat columns of dates and names. Between the official records, she could see notes in the margins: who received which inheritance, which daughter was favored, which son was dismissed. A century and a half of family politics recorded in fading ink. But that doesn't excuse what Sarah did, Uncle Robert said, his voice rough with emotion. He'd arrived moments ago, having searched the cathedral grounds for his daughter without success. Drugging her own cousin, forging documents. She could go to jail for this. The family Bible lay open between them like a silent witness to generations of family strife. Emily traced her own name, written in her father's proud hand on the day of her birth. Below it, in the same ink, was Sarah's name, recorded just 3 months later. Cousins by birth, sisters by choice, until today. "She was always so bitter about the internship," Aunt Margaret said quietly, turning another page. "But I never told anyone. It wasn't actually Emily who got it over Sarah. Sarah was the hospital's first choice, but she deliberately tanked her final interview. The interviewer told me later she seemed distracted, kept asking about the medical students' study schedules." James stiffened beside Emily. "That was when I was preparing for my boards. Sarah was my study partner. She said she'd dropped out of the running for the internship to focus on her research. Because she wanted to spend time with you." Emily realized, the pieces falling into place. "She gave up her dream job just to be near you during study sessions." The Bible's pages seemed to hold new meaning now, each recorded event taking on a different light. The car their grandfather had left to Emily, Sarah had been the one to suggest Emily would appreciate it more. The sapphire ring from their grandmother, Sarah, had helped choose it, had even sized it for Emily's finger. She wasn't losing these things to Emily, James said slowly. She was deliberately giving them up, creating a narrative of being the overlooked cousin, building resentment she could use to justify stealing my life, Emily finished. The words hung in the air, heavy as the Bible's leather binding. A commotion outside the chapel made them all look up. Lisa burst in, her bridesmaids, dressed slightly disheveled. "They found Sarah's phone," she announced. "She left it in the bride's room, and you need to see what's on it." The phone was placed on top of the family Bible, its modern glass and metal a stark contrast to the aged leather and paper. On the screen was a photo album titled The Real Wedding, containing hundreds of pictures, Emily and James at various events, but with Sarah's face digitally substituted for Emily's. A digital revision of history, just as devastating as any. Manipulation recorded in the Bible's pages. "There's more," Lisa said hesitantly. "Notes, plans, practice videos of her copying Emily's voice and mannerisms. She's been planning this for, well, it looks like since the day you two met." Emily felt James's hand tighten around hers. 2 years, he said quietly. She spent 2 years planning this. "The dedication doesn't make it less wrong," Uncle Robert said firmly. "If anything, it makes it worse. This was calculated, deliberate." "Look at this," Aunt Margaret interrupted, her finger marking a place in the Bible. "The same thing happened 4 generations ago. Twin sisters, a stolen identity, a wedding stopped at the last minute. It's like history repeating itself." "But it's not," Emily said, pushing the Bible away gently, "because I'm not going to let this destroy our family the way that incident did. Look at the records. Those sisters never spoke again. Their children never knew their cousins. The rift grew wider with each generation." "Emily," her mother said softly, "she drugged you. She tried to steal your life. How can you even think of forgiveness?" Emily looked down at the family Bible, its pages filled with records of births and marriages, but also of feuds and reconciliations, of human weakness and human strength. "Because she's sick," she said finally. "This level of obsession, of planning, she needs help, not punishment." James cleared his throat. "The hospital has an excellent psychiatric unit. I could make some calls, speak to colleagues who specialize in obsessive behavior and identity disorders." "You do that?" Uncle Robert asked, surprise evident in his voice. "After what she tried to do." "I'm a doctor," James said simply. "When someone's in pain, you help them, even if they've hurt you." Emily touched the Bible's worn cover, thinking of all the family stories it contained, the triumphs and tragedies, the loves and losses. "Sarah's still in here," she said, opening to their birth records again. "Still part of this family, and maybe that's why this happened now, with us. Maybe we're the generation that needs to break this cycle of rivalry and resentment." The phone on top of the Bible lit up with an incoming text. Sarah's face appeared in the digitally altered wedding photo she'd set as her background, a haunting image of what she'd tried to make real. "She's at Grandma Rose's house," Lisa said, reading the message. "Says she's ready to talk, if we're willing to listen." Emily looked at the family Bible one last time, at the generations of family history recorded in its pages. Then she stood, still holding James's hand. "We're willing," she said firmly. "It's time to write a different kind of ending to this story." At Grandma Rose's Victorian house, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, a torn wedding photograph spread before her like a confession. She'd ripped it straight down the middle, separating herself in the stolen white dress from James and the rest of the wedding party. The jagged edge of the tear seemed to mock all her careful planning, all her precise manipulation, now ended in this rough division. Emily entered first, James and their parents hanging back in the doorway. The familiar scent of Grandma Rose's house, lemon furniture polish and dried lavender, brought back memories of childhood summers spent here with Sarah, before dreams of wedding veils and borrowed names had poisoned everything. "I found Mom's old wedding album in the attic," Sarah said without looking up. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its earlier attempt to mimic Emily's tones. "Did you know Grandma Rose almost called off her wedding too? There's a note tucked in the back about another man, a choice she almost made." "Sarah," Emily said quietly, taking the seat across from her cousin. The torn photograph lay between them like a border marking damaged territory. "We need to talk about what happened. I have the dress in her old garment bag upstairs," Sarah continued, as if Emily hadn't spoken. "Still perfect, even after everything. You can still use it if you want, though I suppose you wouldn't, now that I've worn it." James stepped forward, his doctor's training evident in his careful approach. "Sarah, We're worried about you. This level of planning, of obsession. Don't diagnose me, James. Sarah's hands clenched around the torn photograph. Don't treat me like one of your patients. I did this because I love you. Because I loved you first, before she ever walked into that cafeteria. But you didn't love me, James said gently. You loved the idea of me, the story you created in your mind. The real me was falling in love with Emily while you were building this fantasy. Sarah's finger traced the tear in the photograph, following its jagged path. I practiced her signature for months, she said, her voice distant. Learned to copy. Her laugh, her walk, the way she touches her hair when she's nervous. I thought if I could just become her perfectly enough, just for that one crucial moment. You'd what? Emily asked. Live the rest of your life pretending to be me. Keep up the act forever? I wouldn't have had to, Sarah whispered. Once James saw how perfect we could be together, once he understood that I was the one who really knew him, who'd been there through all those late-night study sessions, all those hospital rotations. I was there because I was studying medicine, James said firmly, not because I was looking for love. When I met Emily, it wasn't about timing or convenience. It was about connection, about seeing someone's true self and recognizing your future. In their eyes, Sarah's hand suddenly swept across the table, sending the torn photograph floating to the floor. I could have made you happy. I knew everything about you, your favorite coffee, how you rub your temple when you're stressed, the way you tap your fingers when you're thinking through a difficult case. Those are observations, Sarah, James interrupted. Not love. Love is about accepting someone for who they are, not trying to become what you think they want. Emily watched the torn photograph settle on the hardwood floor, the white of the wedding dress now dusty and grey. Why didn't you ever just tell him how you felt? She asked softly. 2 years ago, before he and I ever met, you had every chance. Sarah's laugh was bitter. Because he never really saw me. I was just his study partner, his friend, his colleague. But you... She turned to Emily, eyes bright with unshed tears. You walked in with your homemade cookies and your sunny smile, and suddenly I was invisible, just like always. You made yourself invisible, Emily said, realization dawning. All those times you gave things up, the internship, Grandpa's car, Grandma's ring. You were building this narrative of being overlooked, of being the victim. But you were the one making those choices. The torn photograph seemed to stare up at them. From the floor, its separated halves a testament to the division Sarah had created. In one piece, she stood in stolen white lace, frozen in her moment of deception. In the other, James and the wedding party waited for a bride who wasn't really there. I've called Dr. Richardson at the hospital, James said quietly. She specializes. In cases like this, she can see you tomorrow if you're willing. Sarah's hands trembled on the table. A psychiatrist? You think I'm crazy? I think you're hurting, Emily corrected. And I think this goes deeper than just today, deeper than James or the wedding. I think it's time we dealt with all of it, the real reasons behind every choice you've made. The police, Sarah started, are not involved yet, Emily finished. And they won't be if you agree to get help. Real help, Sarah. Not just for today, but for everything that led us here. Outside, a car door slammed and Sarah flinched. Aunt Margaret's voice carried through the open window, followed by Uncle Robert's deeper tones. The torn photograph shifted slightly in the breeze from the window, its edges curling like pages turning to a new chapter. I don't know how to fix this, Sarah whispered, and for the first time since the chaos at the cathedral, she sounded like herself. Not an imitation of Emily, not the confident bride she'd pretended to be, but simply Sarah, lost and afraid. Emily reached across the table, not quite touching her cousin's hand, but leaving her own palm up, an offer of possibility. We start with the truth, she said. All of it, Sarah. Everything you've been hiding, everything you've been planning, and then we start rebuilding one piece at a time. Sarah looked down at the torn photograph, at the physical representation. of her broken dreams lying on Grandma Rose's hardwood floor. Then slowly she reached for Emily's outstretched hand. "I've been keeping a journal," she said quietly, "on my laptop. It has everything. From the first day I met James. Every plan, every thought. If you want to understand, that's where to start." Emily's fingers closed gently around her cousin's hand, bridging the gap that the torn photograph had illustrated so starkly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a first step toward healing what had been broken. In this house of childhood memories and family histories. "Then that's where we'll start," Emily said firmly, as James and their parents moved further into the room, surrounding the table where two cousins sat connected by touch but separated by actions, the torn photograph at their feet marking the end of one chapter and the tentative beginning of another. 1 month later, in the garden of Grandma Rose's house, 2 simple gold rings lay on a white silk cushion. They weren't the ornate bands chosen for the cathedral ceremony. Those had been returned, along with all the other trappings of Sarah's elaborate deception. These rings were different, understated, honest, chosen together by Emily and James in a quiet moment of renewal. The autumn garden, with its late-blooming roses and golden afternoon light, hosted only their closest family members. No videographers this time, no formal procession, no elaborate decorations. Just 40 wooden chairs arranged in intimate rows, and an arch of white roses where Reverend Mary from their local church waited with a gentle smile. Emily stood before the mirror in what had once been her grandmother's bedroom, wearing a simple ivory dress she'd chosen last week. No veil this time. They'd all had enough of veils and hidden faces. Her mother helped pin a single rose in her hair, their eyes meeting in the reflection. "Sarah started her treatment program yesterday," her mother said softly, smoothing Emily's hair. "Dr. Richardson says she's showing real progress in acknowledging her behaviors." Emily nodded, touching the rose in her hair. "I know. James has been consulting with the treatment team." She paused, considering her next words carefully. "They think it might be good for me to visit her once she's further along in the program, to talk about everything, really talk, without all the pretense and performance." Through the window she could see James in the garden below, checking the rings on their cushion for the dozenth time. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze, and smiled, that same warm, genuine smile that had first captured her heart in the hospital cafeteria. "Are you sure about keeping it small this time?" her mother asked, adjusting the rose one final time. "People would understand if you wanted the big ceremony you originally planned." Emily turned from the mirror, taking in the familiar details of her grandmother's room, the faded wallpaper, the old photographs, the generations of family history surrounding them. "This is better," she said firmly. "Real, like us." The new rings caught the sunlight as Emily descended the stairs. There, simple bands representing everything the original ceremony had not been, honest, unadorned, true. James waited in the garden, looking handsome in a light grey suit that hadn't been chosen to match any elaborate colour scheme or formal requirements. Their guests sat in comfortable intimacy, parents in the front row, close friends scattered throughout, chosen family filling in the spaces between. There were conspicuous absences. Sarah, of course, still in her first week of intensive treatment. Several relatives who hadn't yet processed their feelings about the previous ceremony's events. But those who remained formed a circle of love and support that felt more genuine than any cathedral full of distant acquaintances. Reverend Mary stepped forward as Emily reached the rose arch, her smile warm and knowing. She had been the one to suggest this setting, understanding their need to reclaim their ceremony in a completely different space. "Friends and family," she began, her voice carrying clearly in the garden's natural amphitheatre, "we gather here today in truth and love to witness the union of 2 hearts that have already proven their strength through adversity." Emily felt James's hand slip into hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. No need for formal gestures or orchestrated movements here, just the simple comfort of his touch, grounding her in this moment. The rings before us, Reverend Mary continued, gesturing to the cushion, represent not just a promise of future love, but an acknowledgement of a love that has already been tested. Like gold refined by fire, Emily and James have emerged from recent challenges with their bond not just intact, but strengthened. James squeezed Emily's hand gently, and she knew he was thinking of the same thing she was. The long conversations they'd had after the cathedral incident, the way they'd worked together to help Sarah while protecting their own relationship, the deeper understanding they'd gained of each other through crisis. These rings, Reverend Mary lifted the cushion, carry no deception, no hidden meaning, no agenda beyond the pure expression of commitment between two hearts that have chosen each other freely and honestly. Emily's fingers trembled slightly as she took James's ring, not from nervousness this time, but from the pure emotion of the moment. The gold band felt warm in her hand, alive with possibility. "I choose you," she said simply, sliding the ring onto his finger. No elaborate vows. This time, no carefully crafted speeches. Just the truth they'd discovered was more powerful than any rehearsed words. "I choose you," James echoed, his voice thick with feeling as he placed her ring where it belonged. The gold band settled perfectly, its weight familiar and right around them. The garden seemed to hold its breath. The late afternoon light painted everything in honey gold tones, the roses released their subtle fragrance, and the simple wooden chairs held their small gathering of true supporters. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Mary's voice carried notes of joy and certainty, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may seal your commitment with a kiss." When James leaned in, there was no whispered name, no moment of doubt or revelation. Just the pure, simple meeting of two people who had chosen each other, who had faced deception together and emerged stronger, who had learned that love didn't need elaborate staging or perfect performance to be real. The new rings caught the light as they turned to face their guests, matching bands glowing like tiny suns. No photography lights, no professional video, just the honest appreciation of the moment by those who loved them most. Behind them, the rose arch swayed gently in the autumn breeze, its white blooms a reminder of Grandma Rose's legacy. Not the complicated family dynamics that had led to Sarah's actions, but the simple beauty of a garden tended with love, of relationships nurtured through time and care. The rings on their fingers would tell this story forever. How a love strong enough to survive betrayal had been marked not by cathedral bells and organ music, but by birdsong and rose perfume, by truth and healing, by the simple act of choosing each other again and again, in full knowledge of both the beauty and the complexity of their shared path forward. The letter lay unsealed on Emily's desk, its carefully chosen words the result of 6 drafts and countless hours of reflection. Through the study's window, she could see the first snow of winter beginning to dust the garden where she and James had exchanged their true vows 1 month ago. The blank envelope beside the letter bore Sarah's name and the address of the treatment facility where she'd spent the past 2 months rebuilding herself from the ground up. "Are you sure about this?" James asked from the doorway, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He set one beside Emily, his new wedding ring catching the lamplight as he moved. Emily picked up the letter, reading her own words one final time. "Dear Sarah, I've started this letter 100 times in my head, each version trying to find the right words for something that defies easy expression. How do you write to someone who tried to become you? Who knew you so well they could almost succeed? Dr. Richardson says you're making progress, that you're finally talking about the real reasons behind what happened. She says you're ready to receive this letter, ready to hear what I need to say. I hope she's right, because these words have been waiting to be written since that day at the cathedral. I want you to know that I understand now Not just what you did, but why. Going through your journal, seeing those years of careful observation and planning, I recognized something I should have seen long ago. How deeply you were hurting. How completely you'd lost yourself in this obsession. This day you tried to become me, you were actually trying to become the person you thought everyone wanted you to be. The perfect daughter, the ideal partner, the successful doctor. You watched me living a life you thought should have been yours, never realizing that my life wasn't perfect either. It was just authentically mine. I remember the little girls we used to be, sharing secrets in Grandma Rose's garden, planning our futures with the absolute certainty of childhood. Somewhere along the way, you stopped sharing your dreams and started trying to claim mine. I wish I'd seen it happening. I wish I had understood that every time you stepped aside, gave something up, let me win, you were actually building this narrative of being the overlooked one, the victim of my supposed good fortune. The truth is, Sarah, you were never invisible. You made yourself invisible, stepping into shadows you created, nurturing resentments that grew until they overshadowed everything else. The internship you deliberately lost, Grandpa's car you insisted I take, Grandma's ring you helped size for my finger, these weren't things I took from you. They were things you gave up to feed this story you were writing, this tragedy where you were always the one left behind. James told me something interesting yesterday. He said that during all those study sessions, all those late nights at the hospital, you never once shared your own dreams or ambitions. You spent so much time studying him, learning his habits and preferences, that you forgot to let him see you, the real you, not just a reflection of what you thought he wanted. I'm writing this letter not just to say I understand, but to tell you that I forgive you. Not because what you did was right. It wasn't, and we both know that. I forgive you because holding on to anger and hurt would mean letting your actions define our relationship forever, and I choose to believe we can be something more than our worst moments. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or pretending it never happened. It means acknowledging the truth and choosing to move forward anyway. It means being honest about the damage done and the work needed to rebuild. Dr. Richardson says you're ready to receive visitors. When you feel prepared, I'd like to come see you. Not to rehash the past or assign blame, but to start the conversation we should have had years ago about who we really are, what we really want, and how we can support each other in finding our own paths instead of trying to walk someone else's. The cousin I grew up with, the girl who used to share her dreams with me in whispered midnight conversations, is still in there somewhere. I believe that. And I believe she's strong enough to stop hiding behind imitations and deceptions, to step into her own light and write her own story. You don't need to become me or anyone else to be worthy of love and success. You just need to become yourself, your real self, not the carefully constructed version you thought the world wanted to see. I'm ready to meet that person when you're ready to be her, with hope for our future. Emily. She folded the letter carefully, sliding it into the envelope. Through the window, the snow continued to fall, covering the garden where so much had changed and healed over the past months. The treatment team thinks it will help her, Emily said, answering James's earlier question. And honestly, it will help me too. Living with unspoken words is its own kind of prison. James moved behind her chair, his hands gentle on her shoulders. You're doing the right thing. Breaking cycles, choosing healing over hurt. It's not always the easy path, but it's the one that leads forward. Emily sealed the envelope, pressing down firmly on the flap, as if securing more than just paper and words. Dr. Richardson says Sarah's been writing too, letters she may never send, but that help her understand her own actions. She's finally talking about her childhood, about the competition she always felt with me, about how somewhere along the way she lost the ability to see herself as valuable outside of my shadow. Healing takes time, James said softly, for everyone involved. Emily picked up the sealed letter, feeling its weight. Not just paper now, but a bridge between past and future, between hurt and hope. I used to think forgiveness meant everything. Going back to normal, she said. Now I understand it means creating a new normal, one that acknowledges what happened but doesn't let it control what comes next. Outside, the snow began to coat the rose arbor where they'd exchanged their vows, its white blanket like a clean page waiting for new stories to be written. The letter in Emily's hands represented their first step toward writing those stories. Together, not in imitation or competition, but in honest recognition of each person's unique path. "I'll mail it tomorrow," Emily said, placing the letter on her desk. "And then we'll wait and hope and trust that sometimes the hardest letters to write are the ones most needed to be read." 1 year later, a new family photograph sat framed on the mantel of Grandma Rose's house, taken during the previous week's Thanksgiving gathering. Unlike the torn wedding photo that had marked their lowest point, this image captured something different, not perfection, but healing. The subtle tension in some poses, the careful spacing between certain family members, told its own story of a family learning to rebuild. Emily stood in her grandmother's living room studying the photo, while the family gathered in the kitchen for their traditional Sunday dinner. In the image, she and James stood at the center, their year-old wedding rings catching the autumn light. To their left, her parents and Uncle Robert maintained a protective stance, their smiles genuine but watchful. And there, on the far edge of the frame, stood Sarah, present but not centered, included but still finding her place. "The pie's almost ready." Sarah's voice came from the kitchen, different now from the carefully crafted imitation she'd once practiced. This was her real voice, discovered during months of therapy and self-reflection. "Mom wants to know if we should wait for James to finish his hospital rounds." Emily turned from the photograph, taking in her cousin's appearance. Gone was the carefully styled hair meant to mirror Emily's, the studied mannerisms and borrowed gestures. Sarah had found her own style during her recovery. Shorter hair, darker colors, choices that deliberately set her apart rather than tried to blend in. "He should be here soon," Emily replied, watching Sarah's movements as she entered the living room. The awkwardness between them had evolved over the past year, shifting from raw hurt to something more complex, not quite comfortable but no longer broken. Sarah noticed Emily studying the family photo and paused, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes I still can't believe you all let me be in that picture," she said quietly. "After everything I did. Family means second chances," Emily said, touching the frame gently, "even when they're hard to give, even when trust has to be rebuilt slowly." The past year had been a journey of careful steps and conscious choices. Sarah's intensive therapy had revealed layers of complexity beneath her actions. Childhood insecurities deepened by perceived favoritism, a desperate need for validation that had twisted into obsession, the gradual loss of her own identity in her attempt to become someone else. "Dr. Richardson says I'm ready to return to work," Sarah said, smoothing her skirt in a gesture that was uniquely her own, not copied from anyone else. "Not at the hospital pharmacy, obviously, but there's a research position at the university's medical center. No direct patient contact, no access to medications." Emily nodded, remembering the long discussions with the medical board, the careful negotiations that had allowed Sarah to keep her license while accepting restrictions on her practice. "That's wonderful. Research always was your strength when you were being yourself." Sarah's smile held a hint of old pain but also acceptance. "I finally read through my old journal last week, the one where I documented everything about you and James. Dr. Richardson thought it was time. It was like reading something written by a stranger, someone so lost in wanting to be someone else that she'd forgotten how to be herself." Through the window, they saw James's car pulling into the driveway. Once, this sight would have sent Sarah into a carefully constructed performance. Now, she simply moved toward the kitchen to check on the pie, giving Emily and James space for the reunion. "Sorry I'm late," James said as he entered, kissing Emily quickly before hanging up his coat. His eyes went to the family photo, then to Sarah's retreating back. "How's everyone doing today?" "Growing," Emily answered simply. "Learning." "Healing." The sounds of family dinner preparation drifted from the kitchen, pots clanking, voices calling out questions about seasoning, the comfortable chaos of shared meals. So different from the tense silence that had followed the cathedral incident, when every family gathering had felt like navigating a minefield. "Uncle Robert called this morning," Emily said quietly to James. "Sarah's agreed to sell her half of Grandma Rose's house to us, said it's time to let go of the past and find her own place to create her future." James squeezed her hand, understanding the significance. The house had been jointly inherited by Emily and Sarah, a final gesture from their grandmother that had once seemed like another competition. Now it was becoming something else, a clean break, a fresh start for everyone. "Speaking of the future," James said, his voice careful, "how do you feel about the news?" Emily's hand drifted to her stomach, where the first subtle signs of pregnancy were just beginning to show. They hadn't announced it to the family yet, wanting to navigate this sensitive territory thoughtfully. Sarah's therapist thinks she's strong enough to handle it now, that it might even be good for her healing process to see life moving forward naturally instead of through deception. The family photo seemed to watch them as they stood there, its captured moment representing both how far they'd come and how far they still had to go. Soon they would add new pictures to the mantle, ultrasound images, baby photos, the next generation of their complicated but healing family. "Dinner's ready," Aunt Margaret called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the warm confidence of someone who had learned to trust joy again, even after betrayal. Emily gave the family photo one last look before turning toward the kitchen. The image would remain on the mantle, not as a perfect representation of complete healing, but as a milestone marker on their ongoing journey. In its frame, they were all there, the hurt and the healing, the distance and the careful reconciliation. The past they couldn't change, and the future they were choosing to build together. "Coming?" Emily called back, taking James's hand. Behind them, the photograph caught the late afternoon light, its glass reflecting the movement of family members gathering around the dinner table, each finding their own place, each learning to write their own story in their own voice, together but distinct, connected but free.